Hello and welcome to this tutorial to help you with the basics of importing data into workbooks. If you've got data that you want to see and use in your system, you can import it as long as it's in CSV format. You might, for example, want to import data from a legacy system to get you started with workbooks, or you might buy in data on a regular basis that you want to import. Using the import, you can carry out a simple import of just one record type, for example new organisations or maybe new sales leads. You can also import new records and link them to existing ones. Commonly, you may import people linked to organisations, or maybe activities linked to those people. You can extend your import to bring in more than one record type at the same time. For example, you might bring in case records with associated activities. And you can also use the import tool to update selected fields on existing records. For example, if the data on your system needs to be tidied up, you can export it, cleanse it, and import it back, overwriting the existing information. You can choose between simply updating existing records or updating the existing ones and at the same time creating new ones if an existing one can't be found. Workbooks provides a 4-step wizard to guide you through the import process, which we'll look at in a minute. The basic premise is that you set up a series of mappings from your source CSV file into Workbooks to control which fields in Workbooks are populated with that new data. Your import will run much more smoothly if you take some time to review your data first. When running imports, some fields are mandatory and some fields have to have data in a certain format, currency fields for example. So it's worth checking these requirements before you start. You can find more information on which fields are mandatory and on reviewing your data on our knowledge base, which you'll find at workbooks.com/help/importing_data. Remember though, if you've created any custom fields that are mandatory, you'll also need to populate those during your import. In this video, I'll show you how to carry out a simple import of lead records. There's a separate video called Linking Records Through Import that covers importing organisations and then linking people to those organisations. Workbooks provides an import wizard to help you get data into your system, and in this session we'll look at the stages involved, including uploading your CSV file, reviewing the upload to make sure it's been successful before proceeding, mapping the columns from your source data into the right Workbooks fields, how to join together or concatenate values from different columns in your source data into one field in Workbooks, how to use fixed value mappings when you don't have the information in your source file, how to check for existing records to avoid creating duplicates, running your import, then reviewing it, and finally how to undo an import if you decide you want to back out the data. On the screen now is the data that I'm going to import as lead records into Workbooks. You can see that this is only a small data set and you're bound to have a lot more than the few records that I've got here, just 6 rows of data, but nonetheless the same principles apply. Notice that the first 2 columns give us the first name and the last name of the lead record that we're going to import, which is great, but it's not the full name, and the full name is a mandatory field in Workbooks. We don't need to change that because Workbooks can help us with it. When we're setting up our mappings, it'll allow us to join together or concatenate the data so we can get to the full name. Also notice that the columns have all got clear names in the header row, which tell me exactly what the data is that they contain. And each column name is unique as well. The headers in the source data don't have to match the field names in Workbooks as long as you understand what data is held in each column. For example, column D is headed company and in Workbooks we call that organisation. You may have columns in your import file that you don't want to import into Workbooks, and that's absolutely fine too. You don't have to import everything that's showing up in this CSV file. So let's go into Workbooks to import this set of data as sales leads. Here in Workbooks, the first place I need to go to start my import is to the import landing page. So I've used the start button and navigate down to import. From here you can see on the left a list of the kinds of records that you can import. You may have some different choices on your database, but you'll certainly have the basics like people and organisations, cases, activities and so on. On the right hand side in the grid you'll see records of imports that you've carried out before. We've said that we want to import our data as sales leads, so from the left-hand column I'll select sales leads. And this is stage 1 of the import wizard. There is a checkbox up at the top here that says use mappings from previous import, and if I check that, the next field becomes usable and I can pick any of the previous imports that I've carried out and reuse the mappings from there. If you regularly import data in the same format, this can be a real time saver, but for me I'm going to import from scratch, so I'm going to take that tick out of the box. As it says here, you can enable audit if you have the audit module in Workbooks and want to audit the records on the way in. Check the box there, but there is a little warning saying that that might slow down the import. That's a personal choice. Then you've got to tell the system which CSV file it is that you want to upload. So I'm going to pick this one. Notice as I hover over it, it is a CSV, a comma separated file. The default setting for the wizard is that your source data contains column headings and that Workbooks should try and auto-map those for you. You can take the ticks out of the box if you want, but I would highly discourage you from trying to import files that don't have column headings. Makes it much easier to carry out your mappings if you leave that first box ticked. By default, the CSV file format will be defaulted to automatic. Workbooks analyses the file format and selects the most appropriate one so that it can decode the data. However, there are other pick list values here if you need them for Windows, Unix and so on. Character set. Like the file format pick list, this will be set to automatic by default, and it will apply the best character set to the data in your import. If you've selected a different file format value, the default value will change to use the most commonly used character set for that kind of file. At the bottom here, there are some advanced upload settings. The defaults are likely to work for most files. However, if you do need to change them, open up the advanced and change things like how the fields are terminated in your CSV file or what they're enclosed by. Most customers never need to do that. So when you're happy with those settings, click on Next. And we're at stage 2 here. This is a chance just for you to review the uploaded data. Workbooks will automatically give the import a name. It says sales leads and it's got my name against it. You can rename this if you want, and sometimes that's quite useful to do to help you at a later date identify where this data came from. You can set multiple import jobs to run in succession, one after another. So you could set up, say, 3 or 4 imports and specify that import 2 should run after 1 and import 3 should run after 2 and so on. We're just carrying out one, so I don't need to worry about that. And again, you've got the Enable Audit checkbox here. What is important is to look at the number of columns and rows that are showing in the file details here. It is possible occasionally for files to become corrupted during the upload process. So if you were expecting to see 600 rows and you're only seeing 6 here, then you know something's gone wrong. If it has gone wrong, then simply use the button at the top left, the cancel button, and start again. There's no point in carrying on if the wrong file has been uploaded. If you do want to see the upload file itself, there's a button that allows you to do that up at the top here. And there's the file. Again, if you realise you've uploaded the wrong one accidentally, then just start from scratch. But if you're happy with what you're seeing here, then click on Next. As you can see, the screen at stage 3 is divided into 3 main sections. The column on the left, that's headed Unmapped File Fields, that lists the header names from your source data. Whilst the narrow column on the right, again, this says Unmapped Workbooks Fields, this one lists all the fields within Workbooks for the type of record you're importing, which for us is leads. And the bit in the middle section, shows which columns from the source data have been mapped into which Workbooks fields. And because we left the box, the one next to Auto Map Column Headings, ticked at stage 1, a number of the mappings have been created for us. And that's really helpful, but you should still always review the auto-mapped fields just to check that they are what you require. So cast your eye down the list here and check that the right fields from your source data have been mapped into the right fields within Workbooks. That all seems to look okay. There's some fields still left over in the unmapped file fields that haven't been mapped into Workbooks. Now, I said it's okay to include columns in your source data that you don't want to map into Workbooks, so you may often find that you've got fields left over on the left there, which is fine. But for me, I can see there are some fields here that I do want to go into Workbooks. The address fields, for example, haven't been mapped in at all. And in our source file, they were in 2 separate columns, but in Workbooks, the address field is one multi-line text field. So I want to get both those columns into the same field in Workbooks. I'm going to do that by, on the right-hand side here, scrolling down until I find street address. There it is. So what this is telling us is that we're going to populate on a sales lead the field called street address. And under source data it says pick a field from your source file to go into that street address field in Workbooks. But remember, we don't just have one field in our source file, we've got two. So I'm going to use the drop down here and change this to concatenate fields from the source file, and you'll see that the screen changes slightly. It's now given me the option to specify which fields I want to concatenate into the street address. So if I click on Add and choose Address 1 and then click on Add again and Address 2, I've only got two fields that I want to put into one in Workbooks, but you could have several here. And just above where I've added Address 1 and Address 2, there is a field that says Concatenated Field Separator. At the moment it's set to space, which is the default, but using the drop down I can change how those two pieces of data are separated within Workbooks, and for me I want them on separate lines, so I'm going to choose the new line option. That's all I'm going to do there. I'm going to click Save and Close, and you'll notice Address 1 and Address 2 have gone from the left hand side. And now in the field mapping section you can see it says Address 1/N for new line, Address 2, and that those two fields are both going into the field on a sales lead called street address, which is exactly what we want. If you look over on the right hand side for a moment, there's a field over here called lead person's name, and it's got a star next to it. If you read the instructions at the top of the page, it does say that fields marked with a star must be mapped when creating new records, because it's a mandatory field and we've got to put a value in there. I touched on this earlier, that the name in Workbooks is a full name, so it's first name, space, last name. We didn't have that in one field in our source data, but we've seen already that we can concatenate values together, so I'm going to do the same thing again for the lead person's name. I'm going to change the mapping type from field from source file to concatenate fields from source file, and this time when I add I'm going to choose the first name. I just want to show you something. This first name up here, it's got some funny characters in front of it. You'll always find that with the first column that you import into Workbooks is prefixed with those strange characters. The import still works, you just need to know that it does do that. Some people like to include a column at the beginning of their imports that's got no data in it at all, so that their second column isn't affected in this way. It's entirely up to you, but don't worry about those symbols, that's fine. So I've got first name, and I'm going to click Add and put in last name as well. And this time the separator that I want is a space, so I'm going to leave that at the default. And that just leaves me with one field in my unmapped file fields on the left hand side, which is company. And remember when we looked at the source data, I said, oh, the header of that particular column says company, and we call it organisation in Workbooks, and that's why the auto mapping hasn't worked. It didn't quite know what to do with that, but we can just manually do that. So I'm going to click on company. When you're mapping fields in your import, you can either select them from the left hand side by clicking on them, or you can select where you want it to go in Workbooks from the right hand side. Both are absolutely fine. So I could click on organisation on the right or on company on the left. Doesn't make any material difference to your import. Seeing as I'm over here, I'll click on organisation from the right. So again, I'm being told that the field we're going to populate is the organisation field on a sales lead. So which field is it within my source file that holds that data? And here's the drop-down list of all the fields that are in my source file. I can, if I want, take data from my source file and map it into multiple fields in Workbooks if that's appropriate. It's not for my purposes right now, but you can do that. For me, I want to pick the column that we called company in the source file. So that's all the fields from my CSV file mapped into Workbooks, but there is one more thing that I want to do, and I want to make sure you know you can do. You can populate fields in Workbooks during your import with data that wasn't in your source file using what we call a fixed value mapping. So imagine I want to populate the field in Workbooks on the lead record called lead source. I'll scroll down and find that. There it is. And the mapping type always defaults to field from source file, but we've already seen that we can change that to concatenate values together. Another thing that you can do is put in what we call a fixed value. So you can just type in a value here, And what it means is that every lead I'm importing will show the same value in the source field. The source field is a very useful source of information for the marketing team because you can put in there where the leads came from and track whether or not they're successful and actually lead to any business. Once you're happy that you've mapped all the fields that you want to and into the right fields within Workbooks, click on Next to take you on to stage 4 of the wizard. This first field, Import Mode, defaults to only creating new records, but there are some other settings here. You can update existing records and create new ones, or you could just update existing records. For us, I'm going to keep this very simple, and I'm just going to say I'll only create new records. It's easy for databases to become cluttered with duplicate records, so it's worth taking some time to specify some rules around creating your new records to reduce the chance of that happening. Workbooks allows you to specify which fields you want to use to uniquely identify records of the same type as the ones that you're importing. For this import, I'm going to tick the box for email and use that as a unique identifier. That means that if I've got two records with the same email address, it will only import one of them. Or if there's already a record in Workbooks with the same email address as one that I'm importing, it won't import the new one. You might have something else in your data set, such as maybe a membership number or an account number, especially if you're importing organisations or people from legacy systems, but I would encourage you to find a unique identifier to help reduce the incidence of duplicates on your database. Once you're happy, I'm going to click on Next. And you'll see here that there is a little review of what you've set up to import. And it's telling me that I'm only going to create new records, populating 14 fields and deduplicating where the record's email equals the email in the uploaded file. So it is just worth checking that to make sure you've done the right thing. Notice there is a back button if you needed to go back and change your mappings. But I'm happy with those settings, so I'm going to click Run. Run puts your import into a queue. You can see here the status says queued. You can go off and do other things at the moment. That's just waiting to hit our server and for the import to run. You can click the refresh button if you want to, and in actual fact mine's already finished. It says now the status says awaiting review, errors were encountered. Don't let that put you off. Notice as well it's right down at the bottom of the screen, but a little pop-up came up to tell me that my import had finished. It'll only pop up for the person carrying out the import. From here you can approve your import or you can reject it. But don't do either of those things until you've checked it. So go to the Affected Records tab. You can see here that it's saying that it's imported 4 leads for me. And you can click on these records. It doesn't matter whether they're leads or people or cases. You can click on them to open them. And you can double check that the field mappings you've carried out have pushed data into the right place. Obviously you don't need to open every single record, but do some spot checking just to make sure that your import mappings were right. Notice while we're here, I didn't map who the records should be assigned to. You can do that, but I chose not to. If you don't specify who these records have to be assigned to, the import will assume that they'll be assigned to you, the person that's carrying out the import. If I scroll down, here we go. In lead source, it says lead finder. That was that fixed value that I set up. And it's concatenated together the first name and the last name for me. Notice that I didn't map the first name into the first name field, but I did map the last name into the last name field. Now you may consider that to be a mistake and you may want to reject your import and just add in that new mapping. Entirely up to you, depends what data you need in your system. But we were told there were some errors on our import, and if you go to the Errors tab, we can see there's a number 2 in brackets. And it's saying that rows 5 and 6 couldn't be created. Row 5, it says validation failed. The email .tom@flightplan is not a valid email address, and it's not. Workbooks doesn't insist that you include an email address on records when you're bringing them into your system, but if you do, they have to follow normal email protocols. So they've got to have an @ symbol, they mustn't have spaces, they shouldn't start with a dot or end with a dot, that kind of thing. So that's why it's telling me it couldn't create that row. And then on row 6, we asked for our import to dedupe on email address, and it's saying that a sales lead already exists with that email address, so it's not going to create the new one for me. So that's doing absolutely what we expected of it. When you do get errors in your import, and you will, everybody does, What Workbooks does is put those errors into this tab called Rejected Data, the things it's simply not importing. What you can do from here, if the error is in the data itself rather than the mappings, imagine this was 100 rows long, you can export these records out to CSV, fix the things that are wrong, and then run another import using the mappings you've already used, if they were okay, just to bring in the data that was faulty, the data that had been rejected first time round. Notice as well, there's a warnings tab and there's a 2 in brackets there, so we need to have a look at the warnings. And it's telling me that there is a bad value for, and that looks very odd, GBP for annual revenue on row 1, and similarly, it's a different value, but a bad value for annual revenue on row 4. With warnings, Workbooks will still import the record. It just won't be able to populate the fields that are listed here. So rows 1 and 4 won't have a value in the revenue field, but the rest of the data should come in okay. Whereas with your errors, those won't be imported at all, hence them being put into your Rejected Data tab. So in terms of errors and warnings, and in terms of either approving or rejecting your import, it really depends on the proportion of errors and warnings that you've got as to whether you choose to approve or reject this import. If you approve your import and then decide a little bit later that you want to undo it, you can do that for up to 30 days, and I'll show you how in a moment. So for our purposes, just so that I can show you how to undo an import, I'm going to approve this one. So I approved that import, and we've got some sales leads on our system as a result of doing that. But I did say to you that you can back out or undo an import. We recommend that you avoid having to do this by checking your import thoroughly before accepting it, but sometimes there are occasions where you do need to do so. You can undo an import within 30 days of it having been approved. And to undo it, you simply, within your imports landing page, go to the import that you want to undo, open it up, and you'll see an undo button. You might just be able to see on the info text there that it says any changes made to the data since it was imported will be lost. So you simply click on undo. It says, are you sure that you want to? And again, that goes off to the server. If I refresh, it's now performing the undo. In actual fact, it's already popped up telling me that it's finished doing that. If I refresh again, it takes me straight back to the stage 3 of the import. It's assuming that there was something wrong with the mappings. If there wasn't, then I can just close this down. If there was, I can make modifications to my mappings and go through the wizard like before to rerun the import. There are some circumstances which will prevent you from undoing an import. So, for example, if you've imported products which have been used within other records, maybe within an opportunity or a sales order, you won't be able to undo your import. Let's have a quick recap on importing. Make sure that the file that you're importing from is in CSV format. Most of us read those files in Excel, which is fine, but do make sure that the underlying format is CSV, otherwise it's not going to work for you. Take some time to check your data first. I'm not expecting you to read through every column on every row of thousands of rows of data, but do some sensible checks first. It'll save you time in the long run. Use a unique identifier wherever you possibly can. It could be something like a Sage account number, it could be a reference number, an ID from a legacy system, it could be anything as long as it is unique. People very often use the email address, which is fine, but do make sure you find something. Once you've run your import, make sure that you review the data before choosing whether or not to accept that import or to reject it, and do some sense check on it. If it's only a handful of things that are wrong in 1,000 records, then you probably want to approve it and then just tweak it to correct the odd things that are wrong. Whereas in a 1,000 row import, if 900 things are wrong, then you know you need to start again. Where you have got errors, make life easier for yourself by exporting those errors from your import record itself. You can export them to either Excel or CSV. They will of course need to be in CSV format if you're going to import that data back into Workbooks. Approve or reject your import. Don't leave it hanging. It's okay to leave it overnight while you go off and have your evening, or come back on a Monday and check what the import looked like, but don't leave it there forever. Don't leave it in no man's land. Either reject it if it's not what you needed, or approve it. What you'll find is that for users of the system, if you've left an import without either approving or rejecting it, they'll get a message at the top of the screen saying that there is one or two or however many imports that require attention, and that's because they haven't been fully processed through the system really. Remember, you have got the safety net to undo an import. It's not ideal to have to use it, but it is there if you have that sinking feeling and think, I really shouldn't have imported that data. For up to 30 days after you've approved it, you can go back and undo it. In addition to this video, there are some other videos on the system to help you with importing, and we do add more from time to time, so it's worth checking. There is one about linking records using import. That's where we import some organisations and then we upload some people linked to those organisations. The next four that are in a slightly grey colour, they're great videos and I do encourage you to go and have a look at them, but I just wanted to mention that they were recorded using our old user interface. The facts and figures in there and the approach to use are still true, but just bear in mind that if the screens look a bit different from what you're used to, it's because it's using the classic interface rather than what we call the modern interface, but still worth a look nevertheless. So thank you for watching, as always. I hope you found the session useful. If you need more help on importing, you can find it on our knowledge base on workbooks.com/help/importing_data. Any feedback that you've got for us, please feel free to send it through to training@workbooks.com. Thanks a lot. See you next time.